Very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us. It is 3 p.m. East African time. My name is Miriam Ogutu. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, where I get to bring you up to date with the latest happenings from across the continent of Africa. We start our bulletin this afternoon from Ethiopia. Armed men have entered parts of major city in western Ethiopia. Residents have confirmed to the BBC. People in Gambela city, the capital city in the region of the same name, said offices and businesses were closed due to the intensified fighting. Some of the fighting is around the regional president's office, according to the residents. The region's president, Omond Ojulu, has confirmed with the BBC that he has no information to share. Fighting has also been reported in towns in the neighboring region of Oromia. A spokesperson of the Oromia Liberation Army, OLA, Oda Tabi, has tweeted that a joint operation between his group and the Gambela Liberation Front was underway in Gambela. Officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo have accused the Rwandan army of invading its territory over allegedly helping rebels take over Bunagana, a border town in North Kivu province. The Congolese M23 rebels took over the town on Monday after forcing some government soldiers to flee to neighboring Uganda. The strategic town is vital to cross-border trade between DRC and Uganda. In a statement, North Kivu provincial authorities said the Rwandan army decided to violate the integrity of their territory and occupy the town of Bunagana. They called the capture of the town an invasion of DRC and added that the army will defend the nation. Rwanda has repeatedly denied the claims and has called this crisis in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo as an internal affair and has denied supporting the M23 rebels. Its army has not commented on the fall of Bunagana, but in a statement on Tuesday, they said it would ensure the integrity of Rwanda's territory. And still staying with matters, Rwanda, all the archbishops in the UK's upper house of parliament, the House of Lords, have written a letter to the British Times newspaper saying that government policy to deport migrants from entering the country illegally to Rwanda shames Britain. The first deportation flight taking migrants to Rwanda will leave today. The plan has caused outrage, being criticized by senior figures, including the Archbishop of Canterbury and even reportedly the heir of the throne, Prince Charles. Campaigners challenged the decision in court, but two court rulings, including one on Monday, gave the green light for Tuesday's flight to go ahead. The government says the scheme will discourage dangerous journeys across the English Channel, therefore undermine smuggling gangs, but charities, religious leaders and opposition parties have criticized that move. And then we head over to Togo, and the Togolese government has declared a state of security emergency in its northern border region. The measure will last for 3 months and could be extended by the National Assembly, the government spokesperson said on Monday. It allows security forces there to have more flexible to deal with threats of jihadist attacks. The move follows last week's attack in a northern town near the border with Burkina Faso, in which 8 Togolese were killed and others were wounded. Togolese troops are deployed in the north to try to contain a jihadist threat pushing south from Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso, where militants linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group operate. The head of the United Nations Refugee Agency has condemned plans by Britain to send a first flight of asylum seekers to Rwanda today. Filippo Grandi said the policy set a catastrophic precedent. He said other countries who took in far more asylum seekers than Britain could decide to follow its example. Courts in London have rejected 2 last-minute challenges to the new policy, and the British government argues that the move is designed to deter people trafficking. But there's widespread criticism by opposition parties and rights groups, and hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Home Office to protest the same. And then still today we have so much news that has to do with Rwanda, and a United Nations tribunal has ruled that a man alleged to be one of the main financiers of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda is free to stand trial in The Hague, where he is currently detained. Felician Kabuga is accused of funding and arming the Hutu militias who slaughtered some 800,000 ethnic Tutsis and moderate Hutus in the genocide. His lawyers had previously sought to hold proceedings against the 87-year-old on health grounds. Mr. Kabuga had been on the run for 26 years until his arrest in 2020 in Paris, where he had been living under false identity. He denies all the charges against him. In 1997, he was indicted by the International Criminal Court for Rwanda on 7 counts, including genocide and crimes against humanity. And then we head over to Burkina Faso. The government in the country says at least 50 civilians have been killed by suspected Islamists in a raid in Seitenga village in the north of the country. The UN has condemned the latest attacks on civilians. The raid is one of the bloodiest since a military coup in January, where colonels angered at failures to roll back the insurgency ousted the elected president, Roch Marc Christian Kabore. A spokesman of the government of Burkina Faso said the Islamist attack in Seitenga was in response to a successful military operation last week. There are fears that the number of civilian deaths from the weekend attack could be much further than is being admitted, and some reports had put the number at 100 and more. The recent escalation of raids by Islamist-linked Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group is a major setback for the military government in Burkina Faso. It forced its way to power, accusing the elected government of failing to address the issue of insecurity. And then we head over to Sudan, and there are reports from Sudan's Darfur region that more than 100 people have been killed in intercommunal clashes. Conflict between Arab and non-Arab groups has escalated over the last year in Darfur, where there is intense competition for land and access to water for livestock. A leader of the Gimir community said 14 villages were burnt last week during clashes with the Arab Rizegad community. The violence near Kolbus in West Darfur was triggered by a land dispute. The UN Special Representative for Sudan, Volker Perthes, said he was appalled by the violence and said the root causes needed to be addressed. And then we conclude our bulletin this afternoon from South Sudan. And the Israeli ambassador to South Sudan has said his country is willing to support a unified South Sudanese army if the revitalized peace agreement is fully implemented. According to the implementation matrix of the peace deal, many provisions should have been implemented by now. But nearly 2 years after the presidency and the cabinet were formed, the unified army is not yet deployed, as their graduation has been postponed several times before. However, last week, the co-chair of the Joint Defense Board revealed that the graduation of more than 50,000 unified forces will take place at the end of this month. Most of the ambitious reforms have not been initiated or completed. Some members of the public have on several occasions criticized the peace parties for intentionally delaying the implementation of the accord. They said since the establishment of the unity government, nothing much had been achieved. They said the government was over-relying on humanitarian organizations, while the few politicians consumed the little money generated from the oil and non-oil revenues in the country that sometimes could be used to support the implementation of the revitalized peace agreement of 2008. And that is the latest from across the continent of Africa. The issue in South Sudan, so we all know some of the content of the revitalized peace agreement of 2018, and of course the resigning to implement that agreement that happened, I think, in 2020, I believe, after having been postponed so many times. Remember after the war broke out and key leaders in this government, I think, broke ranks, President Kiir and his first president, Dr. Riek Machar, remember? And so they resigned this agreement of course, reiterating that their commitment to make sure that the provisions of these agreements could be implemented, because it needs a concerted effort with all stakeholders in South Sudan, involved in this. And so nothing much have been happening. But at the beginning of this year, I think around February, March, we started getting good reports from South Sudan that, it was on its way to implementing, and there are some strides that seems to have been being made in South Sudan as far as implementing the aspects of this revitalized peace agreement is concerned. And one of my thinking perhaps was because the Pope was supposed to be visiting, South Sudan, and later go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. He was supposed to go to Goma. But we know the Pope has not been in his best health, and so he made an announcement on Sunday that he will not be able, he really regretted that he will not be able to make it to South Sudan and also to go to the DRC. And so that perhaps might have some impact, because I believe that it is the reason why Pope, was expected to visit South Sudan. That is why these leaders had to start acting and doing something so that when the Pope comes, remember after that wonderful kiss they received in that spiritual retreat they had in the Vatican in 2019, I'm sure some of us can remember that. And there hasn't been nothing much to show for it. So this time I think they wanted, when the Pope shows up in South Sudan, that they will have a list of at least a couple of things that they've been able to achieve together. And that's why I believe they've been making this strides. So now that the Pope is not coming, and the reason why I'm saying this is because nothing much has been happening. There's not been a lot of willingness in the stakeholders in South Sudan to actually go through with implementation of this. Of course, some of that is being blamed on the lack of funding, because a lot of some of these things that are contained here require so much money. But we know also corruption is really thriving in South Sudan, and that is because it lacks structures of accountability, and that has been brought about by the state the country has found itself since it got its independence. And so it's very difficult to account to the money that they get from oil and non-oil revenue. And as much as money is the key things that is being blamed for the slow implementation of this or lack thereof, also I think the key thing is the lack of interest or willingness, among the key stakeholders in South Sudan. Because why I'm saying this is, if you look at several reports that have been presented to the United Nations Security Council from South Sudan with different organizations, it will tell you how, people are really benefiting from South Sudan in the middle of the chaos. As unstructured as it is, as chaotic as it is, there are people who will make sure South Sudan remains like that. Because as long as South Sudan remains chaotic, as long as South Sudan remains without very proper structures of accountability, they will continue siphoning, they will continue benefiting, they will continue, gaining from the country and from the people of South Sudan, and who will ask? Okay, so there are, I think, a section of people who are pushing for change, and they really are interested, and they have genuine love for their country among those leaders, and they really want a stable Sudan so that, Sudan can be just as a normal country in this continent. But there are a section of those leaders that are really not interested, because they keep benefiting as long as Sudan continues to stay the way it is. So Sudan is meant to be going to its elections next year. Those elections were expected to happen this year, but that could not happen because Sudan was not adequately, prepared, and they did not have the fund. We are halfway through the year. I have not heard any preparations of the elections that are expected to happen next year. I've not heard if South Sudan is planning to register its voters. There was a census that was supposed to happen. That has not happened. And so the preparations to the elections next year is not is not taking place. So that means even chances of that election happening next year is still very, very low, because the situation, I think, still remains the same the last year and the other year that brought President Salva Kiir to announce that it is impossible perhaps to have elections in 2022. But that, I don't know how it's going to be possible in 2023, because these issues have not been addressed. So Sudan is stuck in a junction where they're just going round and the country can't move forward, because also election is a very important aspect of this young and growing democracy. I don't know if I should use the word democracy, but a young country in Africa, they're still trying to figure out their democracy, okay? They're really still trying to figure that out. They haven't really gotten a grip of it. So right now, they're still trying to, even how they have members of parliament, they're, I think, picked or appointed, or they just have ways, but they're not directly elected by the people, and of course, so they're still trying to figure out this how their governance structures works before they can fully embrace what we look at as democracy, and of course considering the universal suffrage, where one man, one vote. So that is still not a reality in South Sudan because of so many factors that I will not even get into today. So now the Israeli ambassador to South Sudan has said his country is willing to support a unified South Sudanese army. Remember, the South Sudanese army is divided in so many fractions. It's like every stakeholder in the government has its own army, and on top of that, they do have their own militant groups in the villages, causing a lot of chaos. And so it was important for South Sudan as a country, for all these people to be brought together so that they form one unified force. It was supposed to be 3,000, I believe, drawn from all forces, all these fractions within the country, and they were supposed to be trained, and so that they are able to serve as a unified force of South Sudan, and not a force allied to this side of the divide, or a force allied to president, or the first vice president, or the second vice president, or the third, the fourth, the fifth. They do have 5 vice presidents. And so that has been a very elusive, thing. It has not been able to take place. And it's one of the core provisions of this revitalized peace agreement of 2018, because you cannot have a stable country if your army is not unified, if your army is not a disciplined force like we see other armies around the world. You cannot have a stable country if your army, different fractions of it, pay allegiance to the different leaders who in so many times do not even agree within themselves. You see, so that is a risk by itself. So it was important to ensure that we bring all these people together. They are trained and unified as one force, that its core work is to defend the lives and the people and the country of South Sudan. And that has not been able. And so even the armies, they were put in different cantonment sites. And they have been leaving. A lot of them have been leaving these sites because the training ended, and now it was difficult to deploy them because there's no funds for that again. And so this has kept postponing. So now the Israeli ambassador is saying we are willing to support a unified South Sudanese army if parts of this very important revitalized peace agreement is fully implemented. And of course, according to the implementation matrix of the peace deal, many provisions should have been implemented by now, like I said, and many of them have not been implemented. But however, last week, the co-chair of the Joint Defense Board revealed that the graduation of more than 50,000 unified forces, remember I told you there's supposed to be 83,000 unified forces, but now the co-chair of the Joint Defense Board is saying the graduation of over more than 50,000 unified forces will take place at the end of this month. And this is not the first time I'm hearing such news. They were supposed to have graduated a couple of months ago. That did not happen, I think for similar reasons. So I will be looking to see by the end of this month if at all these over 50,000 unified forces would have graduated and will be deployed to different areas in South Sudan. So that is something I'll be looking to see. And so we continue seeing how that will work out there. And of course, renewed violence in Darfur. That is also something in Sudan. That is something that should be worrying all of us. And the idea of, UK flying asylum seekers to Rwanda. That is something, the plan has been met with a lot of condemnation, but the court ruled twice. There were two cases that were taken to court, and the court in Britain ruled in favor of that. So that means the first flight with asylum seekers and refugees from around the world will land in Rwanda later on today. And the British government argues that the move is designed to deter people trafficking, but there's been widespread criticism by opposition parties and rights groups. I think this is a very long conversation that I don't feel like I want to get into this afternoon, because there's a lot of aspects to what we see happen. And also we know that the main reason why Britain, as much as it has offered a safe haven to many refugees over the years, and I think if you're seeking to go to the Britain the right way, I think there are possibilities you can do that, and you can be able to go and become a resident there. I know a couple of people even from Kenya who are there, applied the right channels. They're there, they're working, they're going to school and all that. So that is there. But also the main reason why Britain left the EU was because of the issue of immigration. Because the EU, the European Union, they do have a policy where, especially that time, I think there was a lot of refugees that were coming from the Middle East. I remember Syria, when in the heart of the attack that was led by even them, all right, that they wanted to remove President Assad, remember? Still there, still continuing. So during that time, there's a huge influx of refugees from the Middle East. And of course, those who are coming from Africa, especially in countries from Northern Africa and some parts, and say Eritrea and Western Africa, I've not heard any refugees from Eastern Africa dying in the Mediterranean for some reason. I've not heard that. But a lot of them are coming from countries where, they're not, others feel they're not safe, and others, they just feel like, perhaps in Europe they'll get green pastures. And specifically, a lot of these refugees, prefer to go to Britain, maybe because of it's easier, maybe they're exposed a bit to the British culture, and maybe they can speak English. I don't know, but they do have their own reasons why they prefer going to Britain. And it is one of the reasons. It is one of the reasons, not one of the reasons. It is the reason why Britain left Europe, because they did not want to share. As I told you, there's a policy in the EU that we share the burden of refugees equally, equally, and Britain was not willing to be part of that. So that necessitated and triggered Brexit. And so Britain has left. So now, even with this kind of move it's making, it cannot be held accountable. It cannot be held accountable. So this is something that is ongoing, and we shall continue following up and see how this plan will end. As I said, it has been met with a lot of condemnation, and even the monarchy, the king in waiting, Prince Charles, was not happy about it, and it said this painted Britain in bad light. So, all right, there you go. So that is what I had for you this afternoon. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. My name is Miriam Ogutu. It has been a pleasure. Bye-bye.